but certainly not least, want to welcome Hugh Ross to give his talk, which is entitled Humans' Unique Anatomy for Thinking. Take it away.
Well, thank you. Well, my name is Hugh, and I'm an addict. I'm addicted to thinking. But so are every one of you. It's a unique picture of every human being. We cannot stop thinking. Try going to a therapist and it won't work. We're all compulsive thinkers. But what's amazing is that there's been a number of papers published in the last 3 years basically explaining that we've been endowed with an anatomy that supports our compulsive thinking. So let me jump into this and make the point here that, by the way, you can get a free book at our booth here at Reasons to Believe. We're actually giving away an e-book because we only had one box of these real books. So you can get an e-book by going to our booth, just by scanning that QR code. And every year at Reasons to Believe, we have a workshop where we invite scientists who disagree with our testable creation model. So we invite atheist scientists, agnostic scientists to come and spend a couple of days with us at our headquarters and critique our model. That's how we're able to develop our model. And two that are relevant to what I'm talking about today is back in 2020, we did a human origins workshop, and all the sessions are video recorded. You can watch them for free at reasons.org. And just a couple of months ago, we did one on human exceptionalism, which is probably most relevant to the talk that I'll be giving. And every year we do one of these talks. Well, what about our anatomy? How is it unique for human compulsive thinking? Well, one of the things is our brain is designed for nonstop thinking. Given that we got a sufficient blood supply, 35% of your blood supply goes to the brain to enable it to do nonstop thinking. This is a comparison between the Neanderthal brain and the human brain. And very quickly, what we see the differences is the human cerebellum is considerably larger in both hemispheres compared to Neanderthal. The right side of Neanderthal cerebellum is smaller than the left. The human brain is globular. The Neanderthal brain is like an elongated cylinder. And especially the human parietal lobe is much longer. The human neocortex is larger. And this is what enables us to do nonstop thinking. And so what we notice is that we also have an exceptional gene. The TKTL1 gene in modern humans is distinct from that in Neanderthals and the Denisovans and the great apes. And explains why we have almost double the neuron density in our brain. So for example, the Neanderthal brain is approximately the same size as a human brain, but we have twice as many neurons in our brain that the Neanderthal brain does possess. Now, our bipedalism is designed for nonstop thinking. And what I mean by this is that no matter what kind of bipedal activity we're involved in, it does not interrupt our thinking. In fact, it assists our thinking. So for example, we have this backbone as a unique curvature, it's unique to human beings, which enables us to walk efficiently and continue to think while we're walking. We can think while we're running. We can think while we're standing, and we can sit for long time periods. Now, there are better backbone designs, which would be good if all you did was walk, or all you did was run, or all you did was sit, or all you did was sleep. But the human backbone is designed to allow all four to take place for extended periods of time. For example, what we notice is that the spine is designed for all these activities. And we have no need for a bent hip or a bent knee gait, like you see with the great apes. We have an inverted pendulum movement, a passive ballistic movement of the swing leg that you have here, an ankle toe movement that actually propels the swing leg, and the hips rotate about the spine axis. And this is enabled to work with our brain in such a way that no matter what bipedal activity we're involved in, it does not interrupt our complex thinking. So for example, you can have even young children with adults carrying heavy backpacks, and while they're doing that, they can engage in complex thinking and communication with one another. So even children seem to have this capability. And so, for example, we were crossing this glacier with massive crevasses. And while we're doing that, we were able to calculate, okay, what gait do we need to get up to a particular cornice so we don't get killed by the cornice slipping off the edge? What kind of, how do we need to cross the crevasses? And incidentally, I was having a conversation with other scientists that was in our group where we were talking about a biological research paper. We can do all that even though we're engaged in extreme bipedal activity. And I remember at Caltech, where I served for a number of years, we had an annual Yosemite astrophysics conference where we would be climbing challenging peaks like this peak, and then we'd actually be engaged in a workshop as we go up the peak to the top and come back down to the bottom. Again, it's something that's unique to us human beings. Another feature of human beings is that we can engage in complex bipedal activity, change our pace, move around, even then when we're in a very large crowd of people doing the same thing, where there's abundant distractions that are taking our mind off of what we're thinking about, advertising signs, etc. Now, this is an example of the best bipedal robot that's ever been built, the Simo. And a Simo can, to some degree, simulate human bipedal activity, but they're not able to have a Simo do anything else while it's focused on trying to walk. And it's a very clumsy walker, but this does rank as the most advanced bipedal robot that's ever existed. But this is something that was picked up in the scientific literature, a paper published just a couple of years ago, where they took 8 volunteers, put them on a treadmill, and they put stressors on their quadriceps and their thighs. And basically they were making it more and more difficult or less and less difficult to run the treadmill, change the pace of the treadmill. But what they did is they had these individuals work on complex problems, kind of like what you would give to, say, a sophomore physics class. They had to work out these problems while they're running on the treadmill, changing everything. And what they notice is that the human is able to adapt without any thinking at all to the change in the stressors on their legs, the change in the pace. They could keep focused on that complex problem. And some benefits of walking. And I may put this slide in because what's happening in modern society, people are walking less and less. We really were designed to walk and think at the same time. And some of these benefits, it counteracts weight gain promoting genes. It lowers the obesity risk. And so one reason why America is facing an obesity crisis, we're not walking like we were intended to walk. It tames your sweet tooth, it reduces breast cancer, lubricates the knees and the hip joints so that you continue to walk. We're intended to walk throughout our entire life. It boosts the immune function and it lowers blood pressure risks. And there's papers that have been published pointing out that when people walk 8,000 steps per day, which isn't that difficult to do, on this campus it's quite easy to pull that off. And as long as you're walking at 3 miles per hour or greater, what is indicated is that you're going to live an average of 4 years longer than people who don't do this, and you'll be way more productive in your life if you make this part of your daily practice. Well, the other thing that's interesting about human beings is we can eat and think at the same time. And you probably already enjoyed that at this conference here. So humans possess a unique anatomy to take advantage of easier to chew food. In fact, research is showing that humans must have been able to gather easy to chew food right away because our jaws and the muscles in our jaws are not like the Neanderthal jaws and muscles where they can chew very difficult to consume food. We right away would have had to find some way to soften our food. And so this is indicating that humans probably right away had control over fire, right away were able to harvest easy to chew foods. And early humans cultivated easy to chew plants that are rich in nutrients and energy. We humans need more energy than the other primates. And early humans, there's papers published showing that as far back as at least 35,000 years ago, early humans we're cultivating grains, gathering those grains, roasting them, grinding them, and turning them into bakery products, which should be easy for us to consume and get the energy and nutrients that we need. And then the studies have been done showing that modern humans can consume all the calories and nutrients they need in as little as 7 minutes per day. So 7 minutes of chewing. Most of us take a little bit longer to chew because we're engaged in social activities and thinking while we're doing that. But the maximum time is 75 minutes a day. Chimpanzees and bonobos, it's dramatically more, 270 minutes per day it takes for them to consume and chew their food. Orangutans, 400 minutes per day. And the total energy expenditure in consuming our food is 0.1%. So 99.9% of our energy can be devoted to other activities than simply consuming our food. With the great apes, it's 15% or greater of their total energy is spent in trying to consume their food. And then nonstop thinking also requires that we be capable of nonstop communication, complex verbal communication, and complex written communication. Only humans possess the anatomy to communicate languages with thousands of distinct words, complex grammatical systems, many verb tenses, a variety of word intonations, symbol systems that are completely independent of the sounds. So, for example, we have languages with more than 500,000 words. English is more than 4 million words. There are languages where there are 30,000 verb tenses and forms. Incidentally, often in these very primitive cultures, they are the ones that have 10,000 plus verb tenses. Verbal and symbolic expression, we can be multilingual. There are people who can speak as many as 8 languages fluently with complex syntax, grammar, mathematics, which supports their capacity to engage in nonstop complex thinking, philosophy, theology, dialogue, and debate. Now, papers have been recently published making the point that when we're engaged in complex communication with more than one person, like an audience like this, what you'll notice is that the speaker basically uses their entire of their anatomy to communicate. And so we have the whites of our eyes. And so where you can actually, that's what's unique about humans. We have this dark pupil surrounded by a big white area. And so we can see the movement of the pupil. And that helps us to communicate to people over distances of greater than 10 feet. And you'll notice that speakers will raise and lower their eyebrows. They will curl their forehead wrinkles in a way to communicate. The lips, you can read lips and kind of figure out what they're saying. The mouth, the nose, literally everything in the head. Some people even move their ears in order to try to communicate. And I remember talking to my wife and saying, if we were to tie your hands behind your back, you wouldn't be able to communicate at all. She's much more expressive than I am, using her fingers, her thumbs, her hands, her elbows, arms, shoulders. Everything in the arms is used. But the truth is, we also use all of our legs, the feet, and the way we move around. It's in the way we swirl her hips. It's all designed to help communicate. And then we have this unique larynx, pharynx, vocal cords, and lungs. Our lungs are designed so we can come out with thousands of complex, distinct sounds. And the problem is that our vocabulary is such that a lot of words sound very similar to one another. And if you're sitting way back from the speaker, you may have some difficulty saying, is it that word or is it a slightly different word with a slightly different sound? Well, how the speaker does that, they use beats. They will beat with their hand in such a way, basically enabling you to determine, no, it's not that word, it's that word. And so this has been referred to as cocktail party communication. And I can't believe how many papers have been published on cocktail parties by physicists. And they're basically pointing out that when you're in a cocktail party, you've got maybe, 200 people in a relatively small room, and they're all talking to one another. And of course, when you get that many people in the room, I don't know why they have background music, but almost always they do. And so you're trying to have a communication with someone 6 feet away, but you got 200 people basically talking very loudly. You try to up the volume to try to communicate and a large background noise. But that's where you see people using every bit of their anatomy to communicate. You have to when you're in a very loud setting with 100 people all talking at the top of their lungs nonstop while they're drinking alcohol and trying to communicate with one another. So our entire anatomy is designed for speech. We have the ability to communicate to one person, 10 people, or thousands of people. And what's been noticed in the literature, we use our anatomy differently when we're talking to just one person, or 2, or 10, or 100, or 1,000. The anatomy in terms of communication changes with the size of the audience and the whites of the eyes, the speech memorization. Unfortunately, we don't see too much of that here in America because we've got hard drives which basically store everything we need to know. But if you go into cultures that don't have this modern technology, what you notice, they have the capability of memorizing huge chunks. In fact, I look at Job as the oldest book in the Bible. Have you ever noticed Elihu says nothing for 32 chapters? I believe that Elihu realized this debate between these 4 men is probably the greatest debate that's ever going to occur in human history. And he decided to memorize it word for word. Memorize it word for word so that it could be transmitted to generation after generation. And then we have the alphabets, the math symbols in order to make all of this work. The human body is optimally designed for very complex speech communication amongst a few people in a quiet setting, but it's also optimally designed for cocktail party communication and listening. If you want to read more about this, Buzz Rana, our biochemist, and I have written this book, Who is Adam? And again, you can get a free chapter at reasons.org/Ross. Here are a couple of references that you can refer to, but I've made available a complete list of the latest literature on these research papers with links that take you direct. I think I got enough copies for all of you here. You can come down and pick that up. But these are the 2 most relevant papers. But here's my conclusion. The more we learn about the book of nature, the more reasons we gain to trust the Bible and its claim that Jesus Christ is Creator, Lord, and Savior, and that really we are designed to be involved in nonstop thinking so that we can actually come into relationship with God and with one another. I'll take the remaining time for questions.
Okay, thank you. And thanks again for the resources as well. Very, very helpful. Janet.
Thank you. So you talk about thinking fairly broadly, which makes me ask, one, as things that are associated with thinking, such as emotions, etc. Secondly, you seem to be talking about it more in a quantitative manner. I'm wondering about more qualitative. And again, I'm thinking in terms of the division between rational thinking, automatic thinking, etc. And in a related vein, I'm also wondering about some limitations or problems with thinking, my personal one being thinking too much, but also people who have problems with anxiety, OCD, etc. So I wonder if you have any comments on that.
Yeah, good question. The research papers that I'm citing here basically did not take into account the complexity of emotions. So they're mainly giving these experiments. Here are intellectual mental problems to solve, like the math problems or the physics problems that you would give to undergraduate students. But they did not take into account, if these subjects are dealing with significant emotional responses that may have nothing to do with the thinking, how does that affect their performance? That would be a very interesting study to do, but it has not yet been done. And yeah, I love your thing about anxiety. I mean, you ever showed up at a cocktail party where you're super anxious? It makes it much more difficult to understand the communication that's going on. So good point.
Thank you. Very interesting. I'm trying to make the connection between, so the assumption is, humans are exceptional, and we have this anatomy that allows us to communicate. And then there's this big jump to say, and therefore that's like something about this last comment, communicate with God. So I'm thinking about the skeptic or the unbeliever. Help me connect that dot. That leap was a little too much for I take it because I share your underlying convictions. But for the skeptic, help me connect that a little better.
Well, it's interesting. These research papers were not written by believing scientists, but they were all really impressed how, we have this incredible anatomy that allows us to engage in these activities, and we don't see it in any other, animal. And the fact that we have a brain that works with our anatomy. And so one of them raised the question, what came first? From an evolutionary perspective, did the human brain come first and the anatomy follow, or was it the anatomy and the brain? As a Bible-believing Christian, I think they were both showing up at the same time. But I was interested that they raised that very question. Okay, how do we get the order of all this happening from an evolutionary perspective? So what caught my attention about these papers, I hadn't seen anything written like this before, and it's like this could open up a whole new field of scientific study. Basically, these 7 papers that I'm citing here, I think, are the beginning of what could be a very fruitful study that could have significant faith science implications.
Thank you very much. That's a very interesting approach on this. I was not familiar with sort of the below the neck anatomical changes with regards to this. As a neuroscientist, there's been a lot of work around language and its specificity to humans, the differences in brain anatomy, the locational language, that sort of thing. And there's specific gene networks that are involved in the development of language. There's a transcription factor called FOXP2, for instance, that's critical. But what's really fascinating about that is many of the changes that are seen between chimps and humans aren't necessarily different genes, but they're upregulation and downregulation.
Exactly. Yes.
So it would be interesting to see if you see something similar with these other anatomical changes, whether it's simply different use of regulatory networks and non-coding regions to look at levels, that sort of thing. So that might be another area for you to think about.
Yeah, a couple of these papers, they did have geneticists involved, and they raised that point, well, we see this with one gene, maybe we need to look at other genes. Again, what I'm citing here are basically papers that I think are starting a new scientific subdiscipline. My younger son is a clinical neuropsychologist, and he's making the point that he's dealt with patients that have lost a limb and getting the right prosthetics. And his point is a lot of prosthetics is based on enabling the person to be able to type on a computer. He says what's missing is we need to design the prosthetics also to facilitate oral communication. And so this is opening up a whole new area in the technology of prosthetics.
Yeah. Hi, yes, I'm wondering if you're familiar with some of the research into dolphins and how sophisticated their auditory language is, and do we still have room for human exceptionalism if we find dolphins exceeding us in some areas?
Yes, well, part of our model at Reasons to Believe is that God designed these nephesh animals, these soulish animals, for relationship with us. And therefore, we would anticipate that God would build within them features that would enable them to have, complex communication with us human beings. And of course, we tend to anthropomorphize. And so we think our dogs are speaking to us. And, you compare what dogs are able to communicate, what we communicate. When you look at the dolphins, when you look at whales, orcas, for example, are very good at oral communication with one another. But it's orders of magnitude below what we human beings are capable of. But it's also interesting, both orcas and dolphins have a high affinity for human beings. They like to be socially in contact with us. I got stories from my relatives in Vancouver Island about these whales coming right up to them and wanting to be physically close to them. And maybe that's why we almost wiped out the whales. They seem to really like us. But again, that may explain why they have these complex communication features.
Yeah, thank you. So I sounds like one of the features that make us exceptional is our ability to communicate, and that mirrors a little bit like when God breathed His spirit into Adam, and Adam became a communicating spirit or something like that. So there seems to be some truth to that. I mean, I believe it because I believe the Bible.
Can you put the microphone closer? Yeah,
yes.
Thank you.
Can you comment on, so one of humans' exceptional features is his ability to communicate is so much more advanced than other animals. And that sounds a little bit like when God breathed his spirit into Adam, and Adam became a communicating being or something like that. And so we have this ability to communicate with God spiritually and with each other. And so can you comment on that maybe?
Well, that's something I didn't talk about, but it's also in the papers, how we're not only compulsive thinkers, we're compulsive communicators. I mean, bring four strangers together in a room. You don't have to wait long before they start talking to one another. And so that seems to be another feature. And that may be something that helps distinguish us, say, from the orcas and the dolphins. They do verbally communicate, but we humans seem to be compulsive in our communication. I mean, to get somebody to stop talking, you got to put them alone in a room, put them with somebody else. You know what happens when we go to lunch, right? We all sit down and immediately we start talking to one another. And so you don't really see that in non-human animals.
And speaking of lunch, it's just about time. So thank you all for coming to this session and for your participation. And can we give Hugh Ross